This happened when I was in middle school. Our class was taking a field trip to a museum in the city. Nothing too exciting, but I was just happy to be out of school for the day. The museum was huge, with multiple floors dedicated to everything from ancient history to modern art. I was most excited to see the dinosaur exhibits, so I stuck with my two best friends, Ethan and Max, as we wandered through the displays. Halfway through the day, our teacher gave us free time to explore, telling us to meet back in the lobby in 2 hours. We immediately headed for the dinosaur wing, which was down in the basement level of the museum. There were fewer people down there, and the lighting was dim, adding to the atmosphere. It was cool at first, until Max dared us to go check out the museum's off-limits areas. We were bored, and thought it would be fun, so we went for it. At the end of the dinosaur exhibit, there was a door that said "Staff Only" in faded letters. It wasn't locked, and Ethan, being the adventurous one, pushed it open. The hallway beyond was narrow and poorly lit, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. It didn't look like part of the museum at all. It felt more like the basement of an old building, forgotten and unused. We walked down the hall quietly, our footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. Max was laughing, saying we were going to find some secret treasure or hidden exhibit. But then we heard something that made us all stop. Footsteps. At first, we thought it was just another group of kids or a security guard. But the footsteps weren't coming from behind us. They were coming from ahead, deeper into the hallway. The thing is, we hadn't seen anyone else enter. I whispered that we should turn back, but Ethan, being his usual stubborn self, insisted we go a little farther. We crept forward until we came to another door. This one had no sign, just chipped paint and a rusty doorknob. We stood there for a minute, listening. The footsteps had stopped. Suddenly the door creaked open, just an inch or two. We froze, waiting for someone to step out. But no one did. Ethan, against all common sense, reached out and pushed the door open. Inside was a large, empty room. The walls were bare concrete, and there were no windows. Just a single chair in the middle of the room, with a thick layer of dust covering everything. It looked like no one had been in there for years. Max made a joke about it being a murder room, and we all nervously laughed. But something about it felt off. The air was too still, too quiet. I wanted to leave, but before I could say anything, we heard the footsteps again. This time, much closer, as if someone was right behind us. We bolted. All three of us sprinted back down the hallway, our shoes slapping against the floor, not daring to look back. We didn't stop until we were back in the main museum, surrounded by people. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild, but I could see the fear in Ethan's eyes. Later, when we finally met up with the rest of our class in the lobby, we noticed something strange. One of the other kids, a girl named Rachel, was missing. The teachers looked worried, but they tried to stay calm as they asked if anyone had seen her. No one had. Rachel had simply vanished. The museum staff searched everywhere, but she was never found. To this day, her disappearance remains a mystery, and I can't help but wonder, what if she had gone down that hallway too? What if something was waiting in that room, behind that door, and we were just lucky enough to escape? It was the spring of 2009, and our entire high school biology class was headed out on a field trip to a nature reserve deep in the woods. The reserve was famous for its rich wildlife, and we were supposed to stay there for 3 days, camping in tents and hiking along marked trails. I wasn't exactly a fan of the outdoors, but it sounded like a nice break from our usual routine. Plus, it was a chance to hang out with my friends, away from the classroom. The first day went fine. We set up camp, explored the area, and gathered around a fire at night. It was on the second day when things got strange. We were supposed to split up into groups and go on different hikes, each with a teacher as a guide. Our group, 5 of us and our teacher, Mrs. Quinn, got assigned to a longer trail that went deep into the woods. The hike started off normally enough, but about an hour in, Mrs. Quinn got a call on her walkie-talkie. She stepped away for a few minutes, leaving us to wait on the trail. When she came back, she looked pale. She told us we had to cut the hike short because another group had gotten lost. They needed everyone back at camp immediately to coordinate a search. As we turned around and started heading back, one of my friends, Jake, pointed off into the distance and said, "What's that?" Through the trees, we could see an old wooden structure, like a cabin, hidden in the woods. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, the roof caving in and the wood dark with rot. We were curious and asked Mrs. Quinn if we could check it out before heading back. She hesitated but finally agreed, as long as we didn't take too long. As we got closer to the cabin, something about it felt wrong. The air was colder there. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Still, we pressed on. The door to the cabin was half hanging off its hinges, so we pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and smelled like mold. The floor creaked under our feet, and there were old pieces of broken furniture scattered around. It was clear no one had been here for years. Then we found it. Scrawled on one of the walls in what looked like faded, dried paint, at least I hoped it was paint, was a message: "Don't come back." My friend Sarah nervously laughed it off, saying it was probably just something kids did a long time ago, but I felt my skin crawl. Mrs. Quinn told us it was time to leave. We all agreed and hurried out of there, feeling like we were being watched the whole time. When we got back to camp, the mood was tense. The lost group still hadn't returned, and night was starting to fall. The teachers were scrambling to contact park rangers for help, and we were told to stay close to the fire. Hours passed, and the group still hadn't been found. By midnight, the rangers called off the search for the night. Mrs. Quinn was pacing, clearly stressed out. It was then that Jake pulled me aside, his face white as a sheet. "Dude," he whispered, "I swear I just saw someone standing at the edge of the woods watching us." I thought he was messing with me, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. I glanced over, but I didn't see anything. Still, that sinking feeling returned, the same feeling I'd had back at the cabin. The next morning, the rangers found the missing group, but something wasn't right. They were all accounted for, but when they were asked where they had been, none of them could remember. They looked shaken, like they'd seen something, but they wouldn't talk about it. After that, we packed up early and left. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had found at that cabin, whatever had written that message, was still out there, watching us. We never found out what happened to the lost group, but sometimes, late at night, I wonder if someone, had been leading us all into those woods for a reason. This happened back in 2017 when I was a senior in high school. We were on a field trip to a college a few hours away, and the trip required an overnight stay. It was me, my classmates, and a couple of teachers on a charter bus, making the long drive out of our small town. The day had been normal enough, filled with campus tours and boring lectures about future careers. I was tired and couldn't wait to get back to the hotel. By the time we boarded the bus to head back, it was already dark outside. I was sitting near the middle of the bus with my friend Amanda, while most of the others were already falling asleep. The ride started off quietly. The hum of the engine, the occasional chatter from the front of the bus, and the gentle rocking as we drove down the highway was almost enough to put me to sleep. Amanda had her headphones in, and most of the other kids were either dozing off or scrolling through their phones. It felt like any other late-night drive. But about an hour into the ride, something strange happened. The bus slowed down, and I glanced out the window to see that we were pulling off the highway onto a smaller road. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe we were stopping for a bathroom break or gas. But as we continued down this narrow, winding road, I started to feel uneasy. The road was completely deserted, with no streetlights or other cars in sight. The only thing I could see was the thick forest on either side, closing in around us. I leaned over to Amanda and asked if she knew why we'd taken this detour, but she just shrugged, barely paying attention. After a few more minutes, the bus came to a stop. I looked toward the front to see our driver, an older man with graying hair, get up from his seat. He didn't say anything to the teachers or students, just walked down the aisle and out the door, leaving the bus idling on the side of this pitch-black road. That's when I started to feel really nervous. I watched him as he walked off into the woods, disappearing into the darkness without so much as a word. The teachers noticed too. One of them, Mr. Bradley, stood up and asked if anyone knew where the driver had gone. No one had any answers. We waited for a few minutes, assuming he was taking a quick break or checking something on the bus. But as time passed, the silence inside the bus grew thick with tension. 15 minutes went by, then 20. The driver hadn't returned. I was wide awake now, the eerie quiet outside the bus making my heart race. I looked out the window, but all I could see was the dark, dense trees swaying gently in the breeze. There was no sign of the driver. Mr. Bradley decided to go outside and check on him. He grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit and stepped off the bus, calling out the driver's name as he walked into the woods. The rest of us sat in silence, watching through the windows, waiting for him to come back. But he didn't. 10 minutes passed, and Mr. Bradley hadn't returned either. At this point, the other teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, tried to keep everyone calm, but you could tell she was just as scared as we were. Some of the kids were whispering, their faces pale, while others started frantically texting or calling their parents, but no one could get a signal. We were completely cut off. That's when we heard it. A loud, sharp thump against the side of the bus. Everyone jumped, turning toward the sound. Another thump followed, louder this time, like something, or someone, was pounding against the bus from the outside. Amanda grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. What was that? Before I could answer, the emergency exit at the back of the bus suddenly swung open with a loud creak. The wind rushed in, cold and sharp, sending chills down my spine. We all turned, staring at the open door, but no one was there. For a moment, no one moved. It was like we were all frozen, unsure whether to stay or run. Then, from the front of the bus, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. It wasn't the driver. Standing at the front of the bus was a man. A different man. Much taller, dressed in all black, with a hood pulled low over his face. We couldn't see his eyes, just the outline of his figure as he stood there, silently watching us. No one knew what to do. For a few terrifying moments, he just stood there, not saying a word. Then, without warning, he turned and walked back down the steps, disappearing into the night. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. Mrs. Jenkins ran to the driver's seat and somehow managed to start the bus. We peeled out of there, speeding back down the road, away from whatever or whoever that was. When we finally reached the main highway, the police were called, and they met us at a nearby gas station. They searched the area where we had stopped but found no trace of the driver, Mr. Bradley, or the man in black. The official report said the driver had likely abandoned the bus for some unknown reason, but no one could explain why Mr. Bradley had disappeared too. To this day, none of us know what happened out there in those woods. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I think about the man in black and wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another bus to stop.